The unstoppable soldiers. The battlefield was a sea of fire and destruction. Explosions shook the ground, sending dust and metal flying in all directions. The Tylox Empire had launched their final attack, determined to crush the last human resistance. Their warships hovered above the land, casting giant shadows over the battlefield. The sky was filled with plasma beams, streaking like lightning towards the enemy. But something was terribly wrong. The Tylox soldiers, tall creatures with armored scales and glowing red eyes, fired their weapons with full power, but their energy blasts passed right through the human warriors as if they were ghosts. Their plasma cannons, powerful enough to melt steel, had no effect. The humans did not flinch, did not bleed, did not fall. Psylocke's commander Varric stood on a raised platform, watching in disbelief. His sharp claws gripped the metal railing as he saw his army struggle. This is not possible," he growled, his voice filled with fear. He turned to his second-in-command, General Kryvox, whose face was pale with shock. "They are using some kind of technology," Kryvox said, his voice uncertain. "A force field, a cloaking device, something that makes them untouchable." Varric's eyes narrowed. "Then why can they kill us?" Down below, the humans moved like shadows, swift and unstoppable. Their bullets tore through Xylox's armor with ease. Their swords sliced through alien bodies like they were made of paper. Every time a Psylocke soldier fell, fear spread among the ranks. The humans could be seen, but they could not be touched. A Xylox gunner aimed his plasma rifle at a human soldier standing in the middle of the battlefield. The soldier was young, barely in his 20s, with sharp eyes and a steady grip on his rifle. The gunner pulled the trigger. A bright bolt of energy shot forward. Direct hit. For a moment, the gunner felt relief. Then his relief turned to terror. The human kept walking. The plasma blast had passed through him like air. His uniform wasn't burned. His face didn't show pain. He simply raised his own rifle, aimed, and fired a single bullet. The Tylox gunner's head snapped back, and he collapsed, lifeless. The other soldiers saw this happen again and again. Plasma blasts, energy cannons, even explosive grenades. Nothing harmed the humans, but when humans attacked, their weapons worked perfectly. Every shot hit its target. Every strike was deadly. "They are not real," one Psylocke soldier screamed. "They are illusions. We are fighting shadows." "No," another shouted. "They are demons, cursed beings sent to destroy us." Panic spread. The Tylox soldiers started to retreat, their disciplined ranks turning into chaos. They'd fired blindly, but it was useless. Varric watched in horror. "Regroup," he roared. "Stand your ground." But his voice was lost in the chaos. His army, once feared across the galaxy, was running from an enemy they couldn't even touch. The human forces moved forward, their faces calm, their footsteps steady. There was no fear in their eyes. One of the human commanders, Captain Elias, paused on a hill, looking at the battlefield below. His radio crackled. "Captain, the enemy is retreating. What are your orders?" Elias smirked. "Keep moving forward. Show them that no force in the universe can stand against us." He looked at the sky, where Xylox's warships hovered, waiting to rain more destruction. He did not fear them, because he knew the truth. Nothing in this universe could harm humanity. And that was the enemy's greatest nightmare, the fear of the invincible. The battlefield lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying the scent of burning metal and scorched earth. Bodies of Xylox warriors littered the ground, their once proud armor now broken, their glowing eyes dark and lifeless. The air was thick with silence, a silence filled with terror. Psylocke's commander Varric stood on the bridge of his command ship, his claws gripping the edge of the control panel so tightly that the metal beneath bent. His breathing was shallow, his mind racing. This should have been a victory. His forces had outnumbered the humans. Their weapons were superior. Their technology had crushed 100 civilizations before, and yet his army had been slaughtered like insects. He turned to the holographic battle display, watching the battle recordings in slow motion. Plasma blasts fired from Psylocke's rifles. They should have torn the humans apart. But instead, the energy passed through their bodies as if they weren't even there, like ghosts. Varric's yellow eyes narrowed. He rewound the footage and played it again. And again, it was no trick, no illusion. The recordings confirmed what his soldiers had screamed in horror on the battlefield. The humans could not be harmed. His second-in-command, General Krivox, stood beside him, his usual sharp posture now hunched. He looked afraid. Varric had fought alongside Krivox for decades, and never had he seen fear in the old warrior's eyes. "This is unnatural," Krivox muttered. His claws twitched nervously. "No species in the universe can be untouchable. There must be an explanation." Varric clenched his jaw. And yet, here we are. A soft chime rang through the ship's command deck. The main holographic display flickered, and a massive projection of Supreme Overlord Xyloxis appeared. The emperor of their species, ruler of 1,000 conquered worlds, was not pleased. Varric and Krivox immediately kneeled. "Explain," Xyloxis growled, his voice like grinding stone. His glowing red eyes burned into them through the projection. "Why do I see my warriors running? Why do I see humans standing unharmed in the midst of war?" Varric swallowed hard. "My lord, the humans." He hesitated. Even speaking the words felt like madness. "They are immune." A heavy silence followed. Xyloxis leaned forward, his massive frame filling the screen. "Immune," he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. Krivox, sensing Varric's hesitation, stepped forward. "Yes, Supreme One. Our weapons, plasma, explosives, bioweapons, nothing affects them. Yet they can kill us effortlessly." Xyloxis' expression remained unreadable, but the air around him darkened. "And what is your theory, General?" Krivox hesitated. "We do not have one yet." Xyloxis' eyes narrowed. "Then find one." The transmission cut off, leaving the command deck in eerie silence. Varric let out a slow breath. His mind raced through the possibilities. This was not simple technology. No force field or shield was this perfect. If it were some form of advanced armor, his sensors would have detected it. No, this was something else entirely. But what? The fear spreads. Across the Tylox Empire, the news spread like wildfire. For the first time in history, a species had been found that could not be harmed. At military outposts, young soldiers whispered rumors in hushed voices. "I heard they're not even alive," one muttered. "They're spirits, sent by the gods." "I heard they're from another dimension," another said. "They exist in a space where our weapons don't reach them." In the imperial palace, the High Council convened in a secret chamber. Ancient leaders, their scales dull with age, debated endlessly. "We must retreat," one of them said, his voice shaking. "This war is unwinnable." Retreat, against a species of mere primates. Another scoffed. "We are the Tylox. We do not flee." "Then tell me," the old one countered, "how do you kill something that cannot die?" The room fell silent. The desperate experiment. Varric, unable to accept defeat, ordered his scientists to find answers. They captured a human soldier, alive, unarmed, stripped of armor and weapons. The human sat in the middle of a laboratory, calm, expressionless, fearless. The Tylox scientists surrounded him, scanning every inch of his body. Dr. Zareth, head of biological research, raised a clawed hand. "Begin testing." A plasma rifle was fired directly at the human's chest. The energy bolt hit him squarely. But then, it vanished. No burns, no marks, no pain. The human did not even blink. Zareth frowned. "Increase power to maximum." A cannon blast fired. Same result. They tried electricity. Poison, radiation, even a psychic mind attack. Nothing worked. Zareth stepped back, eyes wide. This is not science. This is something else entirely. The human prisoner, sitting calmly, finally spoke. "You're wasting your time," he said in a low voice. Varric, who had been watching, stepped forward. "Then tell me, what are you?" The human smiled. It was a simple smile, a knowing smile. "You wouldn't understand," he said. "Not yet." The room fell into stunned silence. For the first time, Varric felt something he had never felt before. True fear, the desperate experiment. The Xylox research facility was a fortress of cold steel and advanced technology, buried deep beneath the surface of a desolate moon. It was a place where science had no limits, where morality was nothing but an obstacle to discovery. Here, the greatest minds of the Xylox Empire worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of war, to bend the laws of nature in their favor. And now, they faced their greatest challenge yet. The human prisoner sat in the center of the lab, bound by restraints made from the densest alloys in the galaxy. Red lights blinked around him as scanning devices, energy analyzers, and neural probes worked to extract every possible detail about his existence. Yet, despite everything, he remained completely calm. His eyes studied his captors with an unsettling patience, as if he were observing an experiment rather than being the subject of one. The Xylox scientists were unnerved, but they buried their fear beneath logic. This was just another problem to solve. Or so they thought. The first tests, failure upon failure. Dr. Zareth, the head of biological warfare research, observed the monitors. His team had tried everything. Plasma blasts, fired at full power. Sonic disruptors, meant to liquefy organic tissue. Biochemical agents, crafted to dismantle DNA at the molecular level. Neural disruptors, designed to overload and shut down the brain. None of them worked. Every attack simply passed through the human. Not absorbed, not reflected. Just ignored, as if the universe itself refused to acknowledge them. Zareth's claws tapped the metal desk, his frustration growing. "Increase the intensity," he commanded. A technician hesitated. "Sir, it's already at lethal levels for any known species." Zareth turned, his eyes flashing with anger. "This is not any known species. Increase it." The power level surged. The lab was bathed in the glow of energy fields that could disintegrate entire armies. The human should have been reduced to dust. But he simply sat there. Not a mark, not a wound, not a single change in his breathing. And then he laughed. A quiet chuckle, but in the dead silence of the lab, it was like an explosion. The Xylox scientists froze. Some took a step back. Others tightened their grips on their instruments, as if preparing for an attack. Dr. Zareth's eyes narrowed. "What's so funny, human?" The prisoner tilted his head, amusement glinting in his eyes. "You're trying so hard," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I almost feel sorry for you." Zareth's jaw clenched. "You are a prisoner of the Xylox Empire. You will answer our questions." The human smirked. "Oh, and what do you want to ask?" The scientist leaned forward. "Why can't we harm you?" The human's expression didn't change. "I could tell you," he said, "but you wouldn't believe me." Zareth's patience snapped. "Enough." He turned to the control panel. "Initiate Phase 2. Full dissection. We will study him at the molecular level." Technicians hesitated. One of them, a young scientist, swallowed hard. "Sir, what if we can't cut him?" Zareth's glare could have melted steel. "Then we will keep trying." Phase 2. The impossible anatomy. The surgical chamber was prepared. The human was strapped to a table, surrounded by robotic arms wielding the sharpest scalpels in existence. Each blade was crafted from quantum-edge material, capable of slicing through atoms. "Begin," Zareth ordered. The first scalpel descended and shattered on contact. A murmur ran through the room. Another blade was activated. It vibrated at impossible frequencies, designed to cut through force fields and even gravitational distortions. It snapped like glass the moment it touched the human skin. Gasps filled the lab. Scientists exchanged nervous glances. This was beyond anything they had encountered before. One technician whispered, "Sir, he's not even resisting." The human smiled again. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. Zareth turned to him sharply. "What do you mean?" The human's eyes gleamed. "Instead of asking why you can't harm me," he paused, letting the words sink in. "Maybe you should ask why the universe won't let you." The room fell deathly silent. The growing fear. Varric, watching from the observation deck, felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. His military mind had faced countless enemies. But this was something else. "Do you hear him?" he murmured. "He speaks as if there is something greater at play." Krivox nodded slowly. "What if he's right?" Varric turned to his old friend. "What are you saying?" Krivox's voice was barely a whisper. "What if there is a force in this universe that protects them? A law written into reality itself?" Varric scoffed. "You speak of myths. Are we not witnessing a myth unfold before our eyes?" Krivox countered. "The humans walk among our soldiers as if they are untouchable gods. Our most advanced weapons fail against them. Our sciences collapse in their presence. This is not war, Commander." He turned, locking eyes with Varric. "This is fate." A message to the Emperor. A transmission was sent to Supreme Overlord Siloxus. The data files contained every test, every failure, and one chilling conclusion. Humans cannot be harmed. Not by Psylocke's weapons, not by any known force in the universe. The Emperor's reply came swiftly. His voice was like thunder through the communication relay. "Then we must find another way." But deep down, Varric wondered, what if there was no other way? What if humanity was truly untouchable? What if this war was already lost? The forgotten prophecy. The Psylocke's empire had ruled the stars for thousands of years, conquering countless civilizations, erasing histories, and reshaping entire planets to serve their needs. They had crushed empires, rewritten the laws of war, and considered themselves undefeatable. But now, in the heart of their capital, fear gripped the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Supreme Overlord Xyloxus sat upon his throne, his massive reptilian body coiled in thought. The holographic reports floated before him, each detailing the same impossible truth. Humanity could not be harmed. No weapon, no science, no strategy had worked against them. Every battle ended the same way. Psylocke's warriors fell like insects, while humans walked unscathed. It was a violation of everything that Psylocke understood about reality. And yet, it had happened. Psylocke clenched his massive claws. "There must be an answer," he growled, his voice like grinding metal. His advisors stood before him, shifting nervously, their scales dull with unease. "My lord," said one of the senior warlords, "we have exhausted all scientific avenues. Our brightest minds have failed. But there may be something else." Psylocke's red eyes glowed dangerously. "Speak." The warlord hesitated. "It is ancient knowledge, Supreme One. Myths, old writings, things once dismissed as enough stalling." The Emperor roared. "Tell me what you know." The warlord took a deep breath. "There is a prophecy, one that speaks of an invincible race, a species that will rise when the galaxy reaches its darkest hour, a species that cannot be harmed by the weapons of others. It is said that they will be the final warriors of existence." A silence fell over the room. The words felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with something unseen. Tyloxus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Where did this prophecy come from? The warlord's throat tightened. "It is older than our empire, Supreme One. Older than any known civilization. Some say it was written by the first beings to walk the stars." Styloxus let out a slow, measured breath. He did not believe in myths. He did not believe in fate. But he could not deny what was happening before his very eyes. The humans were untouchable. And now, the universe was whispering that this had always been foretold. The hunt for the lost records. Deep beneath the imperial palace, in the ancient vaults that had not been opened in centuries, a group of Psylocke scholars and priests worked in frantic silence. The room was lined with stone tablets, ancient scrolls, and forgotten relics, artifacts from a time before the Psylocks had conquered the stars. Dr. Kelvar, an elderly historian with scales as pale as dust, held a trembling claw over a worn-out data slate. He had spent his life studying the past, but nothing had prepared him for this. The writings of the first ones, he murmured. His assistants watched in silence as he translated the old symbols, his voice trembling with each word. When the sky burns red and war consumes the stars, they shall come. From the dust of a forgotten world, they shall rise. No blade shall cut them, no fire shall burn them, no force shall break them. For they are the last warriors, the final defenders of the great design. They shall walk among the stars, unchallenged, unbroken, unstoppable. Kelvar's hands shook as he turned to the others. This is them. One of the younger scholars swallowed hard. But how? How could such a prophecy exist? Humanity is a young species. They should not even be important in the grand scheme of things. Kelvar's eyes darkened. Unless they were always meant to be. The room fell into an eerie silence. What if the humans were not just another species? What if they were a force of nature, written into the fabric of the cosmos itself? A desperate council meeting. The Psylocke's High Council convened in the Emperor's war chamber for the first time in over 1,000 years. Seated in a circular formation, the most powerful warlords, scientists, and strategists of the Empire debated their next move. We cannot fight them, one of the generals admitted, his voice hollow. No army, no strategy will work against them. Then what do you suggest? Another snapped. That we bow before them. That we surrender to an inferior race. They are not inferior, said an old priest, his voice low and steady. They are something else. We have fought for power, for control, believing we were the greatest beings in existence. But what if we were only rulers because they had not yet come? Psylocke listened to their words carefully. He did not like what he was hearing, but he could not ignore the truth. No matter how powerful the Psylocke's empire was, it was powerless against fate. He stood, his towering form casting a long shadow over the council. If this prophecy is true, he said slowly, then we are left with only one choice. The room fell silent. We must find a way to control them, he continued. Or failing that, we must prepare to kneel. The warlords flinched at the idea of submission, but in the depths of their hearts, they knew. They had already lost. The unshaken enemy. Back on the battlefield, the war raged on. But humanity was untouched. The soldiers walked through fire, through plasma, through death itself. The Psylocks fled before them, their war cries turning to screams of panic. A human commander, General Elias, stood atop a hill, watching the enemy break. His second-in-command, Captain Rourke, stepped beside him, arms crossed. They're running, Rourke said, amused. They always do, Elias replied. Rourke exhaled. You think they'll surrender soon? Elias smirked. Maybe, maybe not. But in the end, it doesn't matter. He looked up at the sky, where the stars shone bright and unbroken. His voice was quiet, yet filled with an undeniable power. The universe has already chosen. The frightened king. Deep within the heart of the Psylocke's empire, a massive warship drifted through the void. The Emperor's personal command vessel, the Dominion. It was the most heavily armed fortress in the known galaxy, a behemoth of destruction, designed to bring entire civilizations to their knees. And yet, within its towering halls, fear had taken root, a throne of diminishing power. Supreme Overlord Xyloxus sat on his throne, his massive reptilian form slumped in contemplation. His golden armor, once a symbol of his invincibility, now felt heavy on his shoulders. He had ruled the Psylocks for centuries, leading them to war, crushing every species that opposed them. But now, for the first time in history, his empire was helpless. The reports from the front lines were worse than ever. Entire fleets had been lost. Millions of his warriors had fallen, not because of strategy, not because of superior weapons, but because the enemy could not be harmed. The humans were no longer just an enemy. They were a force of nature. Psylocks exhaled slowly, his glowing red eyes flickering as he turned to his advisors. They stood in silence, afraid to speak. Even his most battle-hardened generals looked shaken. "Tell me," the emperor growled. "Is there anything new? Anything that will turn this war in our favor?" The room remained silent. One of his advisors, Warlord Krevoth, finally stepped forward, but his voice was hesitant. "My lord, we have explored all possible countermeasures. The scientists have failed. The weapons have failed. Our strategies have failed." Psylocks clenched his claws against the armrest of his throne. "And you expect me to accept this?" Krevoth's throat tightened. "No, Supreme One. But there is something else." The Emperor's gaze sharpened. "Speak." Krevoth exchanged a nervous glance with the others before continuing. "We intercepted communications between human commanders. Their words suggest they know why they are untouchable." A chill ran through the room. Psylocks leaned forward. "They know." Krevoth nodded. "Yes, my lord. And that means there is a secret, something they understand that we do not. If we can uncover it, perhaps we can break it." The Emperor's fingers drummed against his throne. His mind raced. A secret. That meant there was still hope. That meant that this war was not yet lost. Or, it meant that humanity had known all along that they were inevitable. The breaking point. The Psylocks Empire was beginning to fracture. Across the galaxy, fear spread like wildfire. Warlords debated retreating, abandoning the war altogether. Psylocks civilians, once confident in their empire's dominance, began whispering of surrender. Priests and historians spoke of the old prophecy, the one that warned of an unstoppable force. And yet there were still those who refused to kneel. On a distant, Psylocks-controlled world, a group of fanatical generals met in secret. Their leader, General Varzok, was a warlord known for his ruthlessness. His scales were scared from countless battles, his eyes filled with rage. "We must fight to the end," he roared. "We are the Psylocks. The galaxy belongs to us. If our weapons do not work, then we will burn their planets. We will wipe their species from existence." "But how?" one of his commanders protested. "We cannot touch them." Varzok slammed his fist against the table. "Then we will find something that can." Silence followed. And then, one of the younger officers, a scientist by the name of Kezran, hesitated before speaking. "There may be one thing," he said carefully. All eyes turned to him. Kezran swallowed hard. "It is ancient technology, something even we have not fully mastered. The reality bomb." A hushed murmur spread across the room. The reality bomb was a weapon of legend, a device capable of rewriting the very fabric of existence. If fired at a planet, it could erase it as if it had never been. Varzok's eyes gleamed. "And you think it could work on humans?" Kezran hesitated. We do not know. But if anything can erase them, this might." Varzok grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "Then let's find out." The Emperor's choice. Back aboard the Dominion, Psylocks paced within his private chamber, his mind clouded with uncertainty. His empire was crumbling. His warriors were afraid. He could not allow this war to be lost. He turned as a small holographic transmission appeared before him. A human. It was General Elias, one of the human commanders. His expression was calm, his voice steady. "Supreme Overlord Psylocks," Elias said, his tone unreadable. We know you're listening, and we know what you're thinking. Siloxus narrowed his eyes. Do you? Elias smirked. You're wondering if you should surrender, if you should fight, or if you should use something drastic. The Emperor stiffened. How did they know? Elias's eyes gleamed. You think there's a way to stop us, a way to change what's already been decided. But let me tell you something, Siloxus. The human leaned forward slightly. There is no stopping this. Siloxus's breath caught in his throat. You think this is just war, Elias continued. But this isn't war, Siloxus. This is the turning of the tide. This is what was always meant to happen. His voice dropped lower. You were never meant to win. The transmission cut out. Siloxus stared at the empty space before him, and for the first time in his life, the ruler of the Silox Empire felt something he had never felt before. Hopelessness. The secret revealed. The reality bomb hovered in the center of the Silox war chamber, its smooth black surface pulsating with ominous energy. Ancient symbols, written in a language long forgotten, flickered across its surface like ghostly whispers. It was not merely a weapon. It was a relic from a time before time. The Silox High Command stood in silence, their glowing eyes fixed on the device. This was their last hope, their final gambit. If their weapons could not harm humanity, then they would erase them from existence. Supreme Overlord Siloxus watched the bomb with cold determination, his massive claws resting on the edge of his throne. Around him, his warlords and scientists whispered nervously, their voices laced with uncertainty. They did not understand the reality bomb fully. No one did. But desperation left no room for caution. Prepare to fire, Siloxus commanded. Warlord Krevoth stepped forward, hesitating. Supreme One, we have not yet tested it on a living world. If it fails, we are already dead. Siloxus interrupted. His voice was a low growl, filled with finality. The warlords exchanged uneasy glances. They knew their emperor spoke the truth. And so, the preparations began. Meanwhile, aboard the human flagship, General Elias stood at the command deck of the HSS Invictus, staring at the star map projected before him. The Silox fleet was moving toward a single location, Earth. He smiled. They're making their final move, he murmured. Captain Rourke, his second in command, frowned. Should we stop them? Elias shook his head. No, let them come. Rourke raised an eyebrow. You're saying we let them fire the most powerful weapon they have. Elias turned to him, a knowing glint in his eyes. Yes. Rourke hesitated. Sir, is it time? Elias nodded. It's time. With a flick of his wrist, Elias activated a secure transmission. Across the vastness of space, the message was sent directly to the Silox command vessel, to the throne room of Supreme Overlord Siloxus himself. The Emperor's holographic display blinked, and then Elias appeared before him. The room fell into complete silence. You don't have to do this, Elias said, his voice calm. You still have a choice, Siloxus. The Emperor's eyes burned with rage. You think I have a choice. You have backed my people into a corner. Our weapons are useless. Our soldiers are terrified. You are an abomination. Elias tilted his head slightly. We're not an abomination. We are inevitable. Siloxus clenched his claws. Do you think you are gods? Elias smirked. No. He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto the Emperor's. But we are something greater than you understand. Siloxus growled, his patience reaching its limit. Enough riddles. Tell me why we cannot harm you. Elias nodded. All right, I'll tell you. The Silox commanders leaned forward. The warlords stood still, their glowing eyes wide. Even the Emperor's breath slowed. And then Elias spoke the words that changed everything. The truth of humanity. You cannot harm us, Siloxus, Elias said slowly, because we are not just another species. He took another step forward, his image flickering in the hologram. The universe protects us. We are written into its very fabric, its design. Your weapons fail because reality itself will not allow you to harm us. Silox's eyes darkened. Lies. Elias smiled. Is it? He gestured to the battle recordings behind the Emperor. Footage of human soldiers walking through plasma blasts unharmed, of Tylox weapons vanishing before they could touch human flesh. You've seen it with your own eyes, Elias continued. Every attack, every attempt, it never mattered. Because the laws of this universe were built with us in mind. He paused, letting the words sink in. Then he delivered the final truth. We are the failsafe, Kyloxis, the final guardians of existence, and nothing can erase us. A deathly silence fell over the throne room. Siloxis felt something break within him, a deep primal instinct that had driven him for centuries, the belief that the Silox were the strongest, the rulers of all things. That belief was now shattered. The final act of desperation. The warlords began murmuring among themselves. Some spoke of surrender. Others whispered of retreat. But Siloxis, filled with one last desperate rage, roared, "Fire the bomb!" The Tylox engineers hesitated only for a moment before pressing the final sequence. The reality bomb activated. It glowed with a dark, unnatural energy, pulsing like a dying star. The ship's lights flickered. A deep vibration shook through the warship as the bomb prepared to fire, its power reaching out to bend the very laws of existence. And then, it failed. The lights returned. The energy faded. Nothing happened. The warlords stared at the bomb. The engineers frantically pressed commands, but the device remained silent. Silox's breath caught in his throat. No. Elias chuckled. Oh, you poor thing. Did you really think you could erase us? The human's voice was almost pitying. Siloxis turned, his eyes wide. Why? He roared. Why do we's nothing work? Elias's smile widened. Because the universe does not allow it. And in that moment, Siloxis finally understood. He had lost. Not just this war, not just his empire, but the very meaning of his existence. The Tylox were never meant to rule. They were always meant to fall. The collapse of an empire. Word spread quickly across the Tylox fleet. The most powerful weapon in history had failed. It had not been destroyed. It had not been intercepted. It had simply refused to work. The realization spread like wildfire. Fear turned to panic. Panic turned to desperation. Entire fleets abandoned their posts, fleeing into deep space. Soldiers threw down their weapons. Warlords surrendered without a fight. The greatest empire in the galaxy collapsed in a single moment. And humanity did nothing. They did not need to. Because the universe had already decided. The final stand. The war was over. Not with an explosion. Not with a last desperate charge. But with silence. Across the galaxy, the Tylox Empire, once the most feared power in existence, collapsed in real time. Entire fleets vanished into the void, retreating like shadows fleeing from the dawn. The great warlords, who had once ruled over 1,000 worlds, now huddled in exile, their voices lost beneath the weight of their defeat. The last order had been given. Surrender, or vanish forever. The unanswered questions, and yet, despite their overwhelming victory, humanity did not celebrate. The soldiers of Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies stood quietly on their warships, watching as the Tylox forces retreated beyond the edges of known space. They did not cheer. They did not chant. They simply waited. Because they all knew the truth. The war had never truly been about the Tylox. It had been about something greater. Something older than the stars themselves. And now, as humanity stood victorious over the last great enemy, the unanswered questions remained. Why had the universe chosen them? Who had written the prophecy that foretold their invincibility? And most importantly, what came next? General Elias, standing on the bridge of the HSS Invictus, watched the battlefield fade into the blackness of space. He folded his arms, deep in thought. Captain Rourke, standing beside him, sighed. Well, that was anticlimactic. Elias raised an eyebrow. You expected more. Rourke exhaled. I expected a final battle. A last stand. Something worthy of the history books. Elias smirked. Oh, this will be in the history books. Rourke turned to him. Do you think the Tylox will ever return? Elias's expression darkened. No, they won't. Because they're afraid. Elias shook his head. Because they've realized something they can't change. He turned to look out the viewport at the empty battlefield. His voice was calm. We are not conquerors, Rourke. We never have been. We never needed to be. He glanced back at his second-in-command, his gaze steady. We are the final step. The last piece in the grand design. Rourke's brow furrowed. The grand design of what? Elias smiled faintly. That's the question, isn't it? The last conversation. In the ruins of the Tylox homeworld, Supreme Overlord Xyloxes sat alone in his shattered throne room. His empire was gone. His people were scattered. His name, once feared across the stars, was now nothing more than an echo of a dying age. And yet he was not alone. A human figure stood before him, silhouetted against the dim light of a broken skylight. The wind howled through the ruins. It was Elias. Xyloxes looked up slowly. His red eyes, once filled with fire, were now dull and empty. You came to gloat. Elias shook his head. No. The Emperor let out a bitter chuckle. Then why are you here? Elias took a slow step forward. Because you deserve an answer. Xyloxes let out a hollow laugh. And what answer is that? Elias's voice was quiet, but powerful. You lost because you were meant to. The Xylox's claws clenched. Fate. Destiny. I refuse to believe in such things. Elias sighed. It doesn't matter whether you believe it. The outcome is the same. The Emperor looked up, his tired gaze filled with something unreadable. Then tell me, human, what are you, truly? Elias held his gaze for a long moment. And then, at last, he answered. We are the last war, he said simply. The final challenge. The universe made us so that no empire, no tyrant, no oppressor could ever rule forever. Xyloxes stared at him. You are a correction. Elias nodded. We are the end of conquest. The stop sign at the end of the road. The universe allows civilizations to rise, to expand, to reach their peak. But the moment they go too far, the moment they try to claim dominion over all. He leaned down, his voice a whisper. They meet us. The Emperor exhaled sharply, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. So it was always meant to end this way, he murmured. Elias straightened. Yes. Xyloxes closed his eyes. For the first time in his long, ruthless life, he felt something he had never known before. Peace. And then, without another word, he bowed his head. The legacy of the unbreakable. 1,000 years later, the Xylox Empire was a legend. Their ruins were studied by historians. Their downfall was written in 1,000 books, their story told across countless worlds. And at the heart of it all was the mystery of humanity. Across the galaxy, people whispered of the unstoppable warriors who could not be harmed, the beings who had walked through fire and death untouched, the ones who had ended empires with their very existence. No one challenged them anymore. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. The universe had chosen humanity to be its last line of defense. The last war. The final test. And so, as the stars turned and ages passed, the legend remained, a warning to any who sought to rule all things. A simple, chilling truth written across the cosmos. When humanity stands, no empire stands forever, and no weapon shall ever bring them down.